Tu solus Dominus, tu solus Altissimus, me et Christe, gloria de Patra. Should I be singing that loud? What time is it? It is literally midnight. That's my bad. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stager YouTube channel. If you are seeing my face for the first time, my name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. And this is my Stager YouTube channel, where I like to review shows that I've been invited to go and see here in the UK. I like to talk about musical theatre news that is happening worldwide. I like to react to stuff, generally just stagey vibes all round. If that sounds like the kind of thing that you would like to see more of in your YouTube videos, then make sure you subscribe to my channel down below. Today we are going to be talking about a production that has been playing in London over the summer. I was invited to press night at the beginning of August, but I was on holiday in Croatia and I have been so busy throughout August I nearly missed this show while I was in London. Frantically got a pair of tickets for one of the final performances, and if you've watched my weekly vlog that I posted earlier this week on my channel from last week, you'll know exactly what show I'm talking about, because we went to go and see Sister Act at the Eventim Apollo. It is playing a limited London season as part of a larger UK tour. Now this is the somewhat ill-fated production that was set to open in the summer of 2020. It was going to be the big hit of that year, I am sure, because it had this galactic starry casting of not only Jennifer Saunders as Mother Superior, who stayed with the show, but Whoopi Goldberg reprising her role as Dolores Van Cartier. If you need to know how big a deal this was like stratospheric star casting, because Whoopi has always been attached to the show as a producer, and she has previously performed in the show in London at the Palladium as part of its original run, replacing Sheila Hancock as Mother Superior for a limited time. But Whoopi coming back to play Dolores is as exciting as it was confusing, because the role not only no longer necessarily fits her from an age perspective. That's not age shaming, it's just accurate that she is not the age she was however many decades ago when she made the movie, but it also, in terms of the role within the context of the musical, has never supersuited her skill set. Whoopi can sing deceptively well, or she could back in the day, but she has never been able to land a number like Fabulous Baby. So I was fascinated as to how they were going to rework this show. There was a part of me that always wondered if we were going to see Sister Act retold through Mother Superior and Dolores kind of having armchair banter in a nursing home, and then you see the show reimagined through their memories, or something bizarre and high concept like that, because I just cannot see Whoopi wearing the outfits and giving us the production numbers that ended up being in this staging of the show. But we're going to talk about all of this because today I'll be bringing you my full review of the production. I'm going to talk about the performances, the ones I loved, the ones I thought were miscast. I'm going to talk about the changes to the show, the ones that were interesting, the ones that made no sense whatsoever. All of this and more coming in today's video. Stay tuned. So let's talk about why Sister Act works so well as a stage musical. There's something so incredibly crowd-pleasing about it. It's hilarious. It's a guaranteed fun night out. People love the film so much. They know what they are getting. They know what to expect. There's something about Alan Menken's amazing disco score being delivered by a chorus of nuns with the finale, with numbers like Raise Your Voice and Take Me to Heaven and Sunday Morning Fever, that just whip any theatre crowd into a frenzy. But there's something more to it than that, and Sister Act can work on an even higher level than the obvious, superficial, crowd-pleasing thing that it does exceptionally well. But it has the capacity for so much heart. You know, you have the obvious characters like a Sister Mary Robert, who brings an enormous amount of heart and meaning and pathos to the show, but also one of the most fascinating depictions of a friendship blossoming between two very opposing characters. It's really a love story between Dolores and Mother Superior and how they come to understand each other. And to many extents, I am not sure this production delivered the heart as well as it could have done. I cannot fault it for the glitz and the show-stoppingness and the big production numbers and the crowd-pleasing aspect. That was all great and fantastic. The crowd were thoroughly pleased. I just don't know if this production brought enough heart. And that to me feels like too damning a criticism for me to give this a 5-star review. I'm giving this a 4-star review because I do consider that to be a fairly sizable shortcoming. None of this is to say I didn't have a fantastic time. It's Sister Act. I loved it. It was great. But I do want to address the areas where I think it could have been improved. To do that, we're first going to talk about the show's changes. Now, I'm not married to any previous version of the show. I never saw the original while it was at the Palladium. I saw the first UK tour that had already implemented a lot of the changes made for the show's original Broadway run. I then saw the subsequent UK tour, the actor-musician version. I have then appeared in a version of the show that I did last summer. I played Sweaty Eddie, who was called that then. We'll get to him in a minute. So I definitely have a fondness for the show, and I know the show quite well. There's nothing like being in an amateur version of something that will give you an acute awareness of the script. But I don't think that my responses to any of these changes are in any way impacted by my own relationship to the show. I tried to be reasonably neutral when it came to assessing whether or not I thought they worked. So there's a new little opening section to the show, which has the nuns appearing on stage before we meet Dolores. You meet Jennifer Saunders as Mother Superior, and it is clear from this initial framing she is going to be the lead performer of this show, which is kind of at odds with how the rest of the material is written. They're very much trying to launch her as the star. She is credited first in the programme. Don't even get me started with that because I think it's nonsense. She also bows during Dolores' bows music at the end. Like, Dolores still gets the final bow, but Mother Superior comes on when it goes da 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 da, which is normally when Dolores would come out and bow. So they are definitely propelling Mother Superior to a slightly loftier position here, and it's because Jennifer Saunders is the biggest remaining star in the production. You know, they lost Whoopi Goldberg to the filming of Sister Act 3, ironically, but they were able to retain Jennifer Saunders, and she is the justification on which they can maintain the very lofty ticket prices that this production was originally launched with. So when people have paid that much to come to this barn of a concert venue in Hammersmith, you have to give them something early on that is going to let them know they are satisfied. You have to give them the Jennifer Saunders that they have come to see. I will talk more in depth about Jennifer's performance, but throughout the show, if we're talking about changes to the material, she has little ad-lib moments that kind of allow her to bring more of herself into the performance rather than the reserved Mother Superior you might be expecting. As the show continues, there are strange little tweaks to random things. There's a character called Ernie who gets shot very early on by Curtis because it turns out that he was an informant working with the police, except his name is not Ernie anymore, now it's Clemont. I have no idea why, but the name has been changed. Subsequently, Dolores goes into the police station where she gives a statement to Sweaty Eddie. The dialogue they have that used to be very charming between the two of them, where he realizes that he remembers who she is, and then he instantly gets nervous, and then she talks about their past and how she was aware that he had a crush on her, and he used to get nervous, and she would call him Sweaty Eddie, except that is all gone. They have a slightly clumsier reaction to each other, where she's like, I know you, and he's very calmly like, yep, I know you, whatever. And it's this odd moment, and she says, you were always so average, I used to call you Steady Eddie. I, for the life of me, cannot work out why he is no longer allowed to be Sweaty Eddie, why he is now Steady Eddie. It rhymes slightly better, I guess, but it was bizarre. It was just bizarre to me, because I spent the entire rest of the show thinking, what is this song going to be now? Or is he just going to make it Steady Eddie instead? In fact, when we get to his song, arguably the lyrics might make a little bit more sense, because when he's talking about how he's always been viewed by people, it's not necessarily anything to do with his excessively moist glands. It's more to do with him being very average when he says, the blur in the background, the king of uncool, the first in the office, the last in the pool. Can you tell I played this part? But equally, I feel like those lyrics all worked with him being Sweaty Eddie as well, and it got a nice little payoff moment at the end of the show when he got to say a line to Curtis, here, take this, you're sweating a little, and it was kind of this homage to Curtis making fun of him earlier in the show. What that has been replaced with is far too much dialogue, where he has to quickly get across the idea that Curtis is looking a little unsteady, which is just it's a weird line that doesn't really land. You can't be like, oh, you got him. It's more like, okay, that was kind of a burn, I guess. Back in the police station, Dolores did have a big laugh line that always used to get a reaction, and I get why they may have cut it, because, you know, questionably racially insensitive, but she used to say, you mean I have to go incognito? That no longer appears in this production. And you can lament the loss of that if you want to. It was a big laugh line in the script. I get why that choice has been made. One of the next big changes I want to highlight is a change to the structure of the show. There's a scene that has been moved around, and we have Dolores eating with the rest of the nuns coming slightly later in the show than it would have done. There was a shuffling around of those scenes. I'm not exactly clear on what was moved where, but it was definitely in a different order to how it has been previously. And I think a lot of this had to do with costuming and getting some changes done, because I got the impression the Eventim Apollo, which is not a theatrical venue, bear in mind, does not have an enormous amount of wing space, or at least I would understand if that's what the problem was, because many of the quick changes that you would associate with the show and with even amateur versions of the show did not happen in this production. Normally, in between Raise Your Voice and Take Me to Heaven Reprise that ends the first act, the nuns would come on in a different outfit. They didn't, they just filed off at the end of one number, came back on in the same outfit. So you don't get that first sort of disco twist with that number, which was a shame because that was always very crowd pleasing. In fact, in previous versions of the show, you get various escalations of the nun disco outfits. Here we go from just basic nun straight to sequin rainbow nuns at the end, which is almost too far. I feel like they potentially overshot the runway on jazzy nun costuming, having not given us anything particularly exciting throughout the course of the show. And it's not necessary, like the numbers still land without changing the costuming. It's just a little detail that you can add that is really going to make this a 5-star wow kind of a show. The audience is just really thoroughly entertained rather than being completely blown away by the overall creation. To that end, Dolores comes out already with her hair down when she returns to the convent after initially leaving during the second act. That is not normally something that we would see from her. Just off the top of my head, a few more changes I could think of as well. One of Mother Superior's verses has been cut in here within these walls, but for reasons I will go into later, that also does not surprise me. The scene that used to open the second act, where Mother Superior and Dolores are having a conversation via some confession booths ahead of Sunday Morning Fever, is gone completely, which I think is a terrible shame because it does a lot to build the relationship between those two. Otherwise, if you're aware of the different versions of the show, this is more in keeping with the current licensed version of the show, which is post the Broadway changes. We are singing It's Good to Be a Nun rather than How I Got the Calling. We are singing the more recent versions of Life I Never Led and the Life I Never Led reprise, which also means Sister Mary Robert does not get to wear the boots. I miss Sister Mary Robert wearing the boots. Can we bring back the boots? Bring back the boots. Speaking of which, I think it's time to talk about the performances. So I don't care who you're giving top billing to in this production, we need to talk about Beverley Knight as Dolores Van Cartier. Now, while many people may have been disappointed that they weren't getting to see Whoopi Goldberg playing one of her iconic film roles on stage, you cannot walk away from Beverley Knight's performance with anything other than complete joy. I feel like she's never got to really tackle a big comedy part like this before, and she has solidified her reputation as one of the great leading ladies of the moment in the West End. Not only does she give one of what I think is probably the strongest vocal performances I have seen all year with Dolores, which is exactly what I was expecting of her, because you just know Beverley Knight to be that person who will sing exactly how she sounds on a recording. She is flawless, she is phenomenal, she makes insane choices, she just lives within a score, and she is so inherently musical, you can trust every route that she navigates through it. Even when it's not an option up, even when it's an option down and she does something different in a more unusual way, I have absolute faith in her choices because it is always so satisfying. The power, the range, the commitment, the acting through song, it's all there. Not only all that, but she has the star power and the magnetism and the charisma to land this larger-than-life character. Dolores is a really hard part to play. She has to win over an audience while behaving in this very obnoxious way for a decent chunk of the show. But you have to understand why all of the characters involved in the show, other than its antagonists, fall in love with her. And you absolutely can with Beverley Knight. She is fantastic. I also loved Lizzie Bea as Sister Mary Roberts. She is a really endearing presence on that stage. I love that she has been cast in this role that's really genuine, that's not like a comedy character part. I love that they have just given her a chance to use her voice on this soaring material. Sister Mary Roberts is a beautiful part in this show. Lizzie absolutely does it justice. I love her performance of The Life I Never Led. I think she's a lovely part of the show. However, I think she struggles to win over the audience as much as she could because there is very little heart in the rest of the show. I will talk more about why that has happened. But essentially, we just have these like glittery, sparkly, crowd-pleasing moments, and then Lizzie Bea is kind of the only force for emotional connection, and she's trying to deliver that single-handedly, which is a tall order. So by the time we get to those songs, the audience just aren't here for it. By that late point in the second act, they have not been conditioned to understand that that is the way this story is going to be told, and they are not particularly receptive to that level of emotional connection. Back on the comedy side of things, Keala Settle is inspired as Sister Mary Patrick. I mean, she deserves more of a role than this to sink her teeth into. She does not have nearly enough time on stage, but everything she does fantastically. There was a moment I couldn't stop laughing when I think it was Sunday Morning Fever or Take Me to Heaven Reprise. It was one of the big nun numbers in the convent, but she was just doing this kind of like step touch thing with her shoulders all hunched and the biggest grin on her face, doing these pumping arms. It was hilarious. Her physicality was just so funny, and she got to have a couple moments where she really got to sing out with her big Keala Settle voice, although it's difficult in this role because that's really Mary Roberts' thing. So Sister Mary Patrick doesn't really get to be the, oh my gosh, what an amazing unexpected voice nun, because that's Sister Mary Robert. I did also enjoy Clive Rowe as Steady Eddie. Now, his material is obviously a little bit changed. He was another one who previously had the capacity for a big emotional connection with the audience. But the most interesting scene he gets to play is where he gets to reveal a little bit more about his backstory to Dolores. And beyond being this comedic, nervous caricature, he gets to explain the circumstances of why he is in the current situation he finds himself in the precinct when she meets him. It's to do with a recent incident with his partner and him being unable to shoot in the line of duty. And he gets this little mini monologue explaining all of that. Now, there is scope within that for such interesting choices, and the speed at which he just powered through it. We got none of the nuance, we got none of the meaning. He was like, oh, this happened and then they took my gun away. Oh well. And it didn't mean anything. It was almost as though he had been directed to just drive past it so fast the audience didn't notice that they were meant to be having an emotional moment. It seemed deliberately ignored and just thrown away, like nothing was made of that moment, of this really revealing and character building part of his dialogue. And then we get to Jennifer Saunders as Mother Superior. Now, I am a big Jennifer Saunders fan. I really am. I think she is hilarious. I think she is a deceptively good singer, even though I don't think she thinks that about herself based on some of the stuff in this production. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think she was completely miscast in this role. Were there nuns she could have played in this production over the course of her career? Absolutely. But Mother Superior, she is not. So the great thing about Mother Superior in Sister Act is she is the complete foil to Dolores on every level. Where Dolores delivers comedy in a certain way by being big and bold and having this diva personality and bringing a lot of high energy fabulousness, Mother Superior is the complete antithesis of this. She is reserved and she is withdrawn and she has this brilliant British dry sarcasm that of course comes from the inimitable Maggie Smith, Dame Maggie Smith. And you don't have to play it that way every single time, but it is how the material is written. It is written for that kind of dry delivery. Now, Jennifer Saunders is sassy, but not always in a dry, sarcastic way. And rather than playing it as withdrawn, she comes across as kind of just like gleefully snide about Dolores' presence within the convent. I also really wanted her to have a steadier physicality, and she kept doing this thing with her arms, and she kept doing this thing with her mouth that looked like this. It was just a lot of like this from Jennifer Saunders, which is stuff I associate with Jennifer Saunders. I was looking at her and thinking, oh yeah, that's Jennifer Saunders. That's the kind of stuff that she does. But at no point did it feel transformative. She was Jennifer Saunders dressed as a nun rather than playing Mother Superior. I also didn't get nearly enough of the belief that she really cared about the other nuns in the convent, and that is what needs to motivate her. She is legitimately concerned that Dolores' presence there will endanger them and endanger the sanctity of their way of life, and leads to her having a genuine crisis of faith. Saunders just seemed vexed by the whole thing and that she just didn't like her very much, and that's what led to her lying to all of the other nuns. So then when we get certain revelations in the second act, you don't feel as though she has any regret or guilt, and then Dolores coming back, she shares that she's a little bit impressed by that, and you just genuinely don't believe her. In the finale of the show, when she steps in front of her to protect her from the attack on the convent, it's coming out of nowhere. You have no reason to believe that she would actually do that, because no warmth has been built up between the two. Because we had lost the scene in the confession booths at the top of the second act, the consequence of that is that Mother Superior and Dolores have not seen each other alone together on stage, really, since Dolores first arrived at the convent. And we need that midpoint as a little update on their relationship, where Dolores is gaining ground and gaining power within the convent and starting to sort of throw it back in the face of Mother Superior, for us to then see how far we've travelled at the end. We just have that initial unpleasantness between them, and then this end scene where suddenly they've warmed to each other, but we haven't really gotten to see how. The other thing I have to say about Jennifer Saunders' performance is that she really didn't seem particularly confident delivering any of the music within the show. And this is not a big thing. Yes, she has had a new song added for when Victoria Clark played the role on Broadway, who is much more of a singer than Sheila Hancock was in the original London production. But there are still many ways to navigate through Mother Superior's parts of this score with a kind of a half speak singing Rex Harrison kind of a vibe, and nobody would begrudge her that. It would suit the character. You're not going to Sister Act to hear Mother Superior belting out high notes. You get plenty of that from Beverley Knight as Dolores. But the trouble is, Bev's vocals are so good that they show up Jennifer Saunders' not only slightly weaker delivery, but her lack of confidence singing the score and coming in the right places and working with a live orchestra. You feel this in Here Within These Walls. And then even more acutely when she sings I Haven't Got a Prayer. Those are some of the more troubling moments in the show from an audience perspective. But what are the really winning numbers in the show? Let's talk about those. So like I said, I've been quick to focus on the negatives of this show. It's still fantastic and crowd-pleasing and huge, and you will have seen a lot of amazing reception from this from audiences and critics alike over the summer, and I do want to focus on some of that as well, because it is still a really enjoyable show, and a lot of that has to do with the amazing material. Raise Your Voice is always a completely winning section. It has so many great elements. The way that it is written to take place over a few days, the way it builds, the way that it lets Dolores carry the whole thing, but you have all these little nun personalities within it, the way you get the amazing crescendo of Sister Mary Robert coming out of her shell in an instant, and the genius of Alan Menken. Like, that has to be talked about. This is one of my favourite Alan Menken scores. It is fantastic. The Life I Never Led is also a moment, and in any other production, Lizzie Bea would probably get even more of an amazing reception for this. But like I had said before, I just don't think this audience have been conditioned up to this point in the show to really expect that kind of a genuine, heartfelt performance. It is very much unlike anything that has come before it. However, it does ready us in a way for Beverley Knight to sing Fabulous Baby Reprise and Sister Act. That is, for me, I think, the defining moment of this show. Bev sitting in a disco ball, towering above the stage, singing Sister Act. She does it so emotively, so stirringly. That has to be my defining moment. And I feel like that was reflected at the performance I was at with the level of applause. There was a real warmth for Beverley Knight in that theatre. What's interesting is there is another number within the show that is so deliberately placed to stop the show and steal it, and it didn't. I am talking about The Lady in the Long Black Dress. Now, I have nothing bad to say about any of the cast members who performed in that number, particularly Bradley Judge, who I think is so well cast in this show. He is giving you hilarious camp. He is giving you vocals and choreography. He's fantastic. All of the gangsters are. But for whatever reason, I just didn't get enough of the comedy in this moment. I think in many ways it's almost been overstaged. It just needs them to be ridiculous 70s guys going for this strange Barry White sounding seduction song about nuns. That is funny enough without you putting in a lot of visual gags. I think the joke gets overhammed to a certain extent, and potentially we've lost the gangsters too much a little bit before to really understand who they are and where they're coming from in this number. I have thoughts about the Eventim Apollo as a theatre venue. And it's not just because it's that little bit harder to get to, because you have the Riverside Studios round the corner, and I think having a few venues in the same place, it's mutually beneficial for everyone. If you can get theatre goers used to getting on the District line 15 minutes out of central London and going to these places, then that's fantastic. I just don't think it's particularly atmospheric for theatre productions. Like I said, I don't know what the stage dimensions are like. It seemed as though wing space might be reduced because they seemed to be working with very limited options in terms of wig changes and costume changes. And I wasn't thrilled about the kind of audience that it had attracted. I don't want to besmirch a concert venue or music fans generally, but for whatever reason, the Friday night audience at Sister Act at the Eventim Apollo was a rowdy one. They were one that were not really aware of proper theatre etiquette. And this deserves a bigger video and a bigger conversation in and of itself, because I want to weigh the importance of mutual respect amongst a theatre audience and theatre etiquette with an awareness of the inherent classism of talking about theatre etiquette, the optics of all of that, and there is so much to be said on this topic. But it is objectively rude to do a lot of the things that they were doing. Like, someone was ejected by security. The interval was about half an hour long because security were dealing with a rowdy member of the audience. There was a guy near us who tried to order drinks by putting his hand up mid-performance. The ladies behind me were just talking constantly. Like, there was some bad stuff going on. Hopefully, if you're seeing this show regionally, you will not have the same kinds of problems in a more traditional theatre, because hopefully, even though I have been hearing crazy stories from a bunch of shows, audiences in traditional theatres will be slightly more aware of how they are supposed to behave. Which brings me to my next point, because this show is now launching the remainder of its UK tour dates. It had already played in Manchester prior to coming down to London, but it will now be embarking on the rest of its UK tour, with Sandra Marvin taking over the lead role of Dolores Van Cartier. I'm a huge fan of Sandra. I've seen her in a few things, most recently as Becky in Waitress, and audiences will be in very good hands with her. Whether the show is going to return to London at any point in the future, I think never say never. It's definitely built with the capabilities of coming back into London. I think there will always be a place in the London theatre scene for a show that's as popular and winning as Sister Act is. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if we saw that happen. Maybe we'll even get the Whoopi version one day still, although I remain fascinated as to how that would even work. But those are my thoughts on this revival of Sister Act the musical. If you have seen the show for yourself, let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, feel free to give me a super thanks. That really helps me as a content creator. Or you can go to patreon.com/MickeyJoeTheatre and you can gain access to some exclusive photo and video content. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you're subscribed to my Stagey YouTube channel. Like I said before, I have so much Stagey content coming to you very regularly about all your favorite shows in the West End as well as worldwide. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!